In 1920, one woman's money and fury helped win American women the right to vote. In 1895, that same woman locked her 18-year-old daughter in a room and forced her to marry a duke. This is the story of how both of those things are true and what they were built from. Marble, that is the first word. Not gold, though there will be gold. Not power, though there will be power in quantities that would have made European kings genuinely uncomfortable. The first word, the word that defines everything that follows, is marble. 500,000 cubic feet of it arriving by ship from quarries in Europe and America. Limestone the color of winter clouds, pink Numidian marble from Algeria, deep-veined and ancient, carrying in its veining the trace minerals of a seafloor that predates human language. Yellow sienna marble from Italy, warm as candlelight, warm as the ambitions of the woman who ordered it. The blocks arrive at the Newport docks through the summer of 1888 and keep arriving for 4 years, numbered, tagged, each one matched to drawings that an architect has obsessed over for months. Some blocks weigh more than a carriage horse. Moving them requires teams of men whose names nobody records and whose wages are paid on Friday and forgotten by Monday. The house rises slowly on Bellevue Avenue, then faster. Then it is simply there, a fact about the world, white and improbable against the Rhode Island sky. William Kissam Vanderbilt builds it as a birthday present for his wife. She is turning 39. His name is on the deed. Her vision is in every stone. The woman who receives this building as a gift is Alva Erskine Smith Vanderbilt, soon to become Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, and she is the most complicated person in this story. She will use this house to crash the most exclusive society in America. She will use it to lock her daughter in a room. She will use it, this same house, these same marble rooms, to fund the movement that changed American democracy forever. And let me be honest before we start. I have been researching Alva Vanderbilt Belmont for months, and I still don't know exactly what to think about her. She is genuinely one of the most interesting people in American history, and she is also genuinely one of the worst mothers in it. Both things are true simultaneously, and this story doesn't resolve them. That discomfort is, I think, the most honest response to her that exists. Here is the question this documentary will answer. How does the most ruthless social climber in Gilded Age America become one of the most consequential figures in the history of American women's rights? Was she always the same person, or did the walls she built teach her eventually what it meant to be trapped behind them? If you enjoyed deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the lives of the people who built it, please like this video, subscribe to Ledger and Stone, and tell us in the comments whose story you want next. Your support makes this work possible. Now, let's begin. She is born on January 17, 1853, in a big sunny house on Government Street in Mobile, Alabama, a house she will describe decades later as having large rooms, wide halls, high ceilings with casement windows opening onto gardens. Her father, Murray Forbes Smith, is a cotton broker of considerable standing. He maintains the property with the quiet confidence of a man who believes the world will remain as it is. It does not. Actually, I want to start there with the gardens, because I think we underestimate what it does to a person to grow up with that kind of physical abundance and then lose it. Not just the money, the gardens, the rooms, the particular quality of light in a house built to receive it. Alva Vanderbilt spent her entire adult life recreating that feeling in marble and limestone and 22-karat gold leaf, and I'm not sure she ever fully understood that's what she was doing. Murray Forbes Smith sees the Civil War coming before most people in Mobile accepted. He moves the family north to New York City in 1859, before the first shots, before the blockades, and then, as conditions become impassable for Southerners after Lincoln's assassination, goes to England to continue trading cotton from Liverpool. His wife takes the children to Paris. They stay for 4 years. Alva attends a private boarding school in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. She is 12 years old and, by all accounts, furious about everything. What is unusual is what she does with the fury. She absorbs French architecture, the chateau of the Loire Valley, the formal gardens, the conviction that every exterior surface is a moral statement, that stone can carry meaning the way language can. She becomes, in those years of displacement, a Francophile so thorough that France becomes her native country of the imagination. The French Renaissance was not a fashion choice for Alva Vanderbilt, it was the aesthetic language of her childhood. And I want to dwell on this for a second, because I think it is the key that unlocks everything else. When Alva Vanderbilt builds Marble House and the 665th Avenue Mansion and Belcourt and every other building she commissions in her life, she is building France. She is building the country she ran away to when the Civil War destroyed everything her family had. The chateau of the Loire Valley, the formal gardens, the conviction that stone carries meaning. She spends $40 million recreating in marble and limestone and gold leaf the view from a boarding school window in Neuilly-sur-Seine. I find this genuinely moving, and I also find it genuinely heartbreaking in a way I am still working out. The family returns to New York after the war. The fortune is gone. Her mother runs a boarding house. And here's the thing that gets me about these years. Alva never speaks about them directly. She doesn't exactly hide them, she simply doesn't discuss them. The things we refuse to discuss are almost always the things that shaped us most completely. The boarding house is where Alva learned what it looks like to maintain the appearance of respectability on inadequate resources, to smile at people doing you a favor, to hate that the smile is necessary, to decide somewhere in that hatred that this will not be permanent. And I think this is why Alva Vanderbilt Belmont is so much harder to categorize than the standard Gilded Age socialite. Most of the women in her world were born into money and were simply performing the roles that money required of them. Alva was performing a role she had built herself, from scratch, at significant personal cost. She knew it was a performance, she had been backstage. And the people who know they are backstage can, under certain conditions, choose to walk through a different door entirely, which is, eventually, exactly what she does. There is a story she tells about herself as a child in Mobile. A group of boys tease her for being too proud, for refusing to know her place. She walks up to the leader and hits him, hard enough to matter. She is not apologetic afterward. She is, by her own account, satisfied. The boy learns something. She learns something too, that the first blow, delivered with sufficient conviction, usually ends the argument. She never forgot this. It operates in every social campaign she runs, every mansion she builds, every march she funds. Her father dies 10 days after her wedding. He attends in failing health. The doctors warned him the journey might accelerate whatever is wrong, because he needs to see her secure the family's future before he can let go. He makes the journey, he witnesses the ceremony, he lives 10 days into her new life, and then he is gone, at peace. She described this decades later with a tenderness different from anything else she wrote about herself. The instrument of her rise is a childhood friend, Consuelo Yiznaga, a Cuban heiress who circulates in Vanderbilt circles. In 1874, she introduces Alva to William Kissam Vanderbilt, Willie K., gentle, cultured, and heir to one of the largest private fortunes in the world. They marry in 1875. On the honeymoon, Willie K. signs the hotel register, William Kissam Vanderbilt, wife, 2 maids, 2 dogs, and 15 horses. This is his one recorded act of resistance to Alva's dominance, a small public assertion that he exists as something other than Alva's husband. He is never quite more than Alva's husband in the years that follow. She is the engine, he is at best the fuel. The Vanderbilt money is enormous, by any rational accounting, sufficient to purchase every form of social recognition the Gilded Age has on offer. But social recognition in the New York of Carolyn Schermerhorn Astor is not rational. The fortune is too new, the Commodore too rough. The name smells in Mrs. Astor's well-trained nostrils of the work that made it. The Vanderbilts are not in the 400. All those millions might as well be in a mattress. Alva spends the next 15 years changing this. Her method is always construction. She will build something so large, so magnificent, so impossible to ignore, that ignoring her becomes more embarrassing than acknowledging her. The 665th Avenue mansion is the opening move. The costume ball of 1883 is the decisive one. The 665th Avenue mansion takes 3 years and $3 million and 1,000 workers to build. Richard Morris Hunt designs it in the French chateau style, gleaming white Indiana limestone on a street of dour brownstones. When it opens in 1882, it looks like someone has dropped a piece of the Loire Valley onto the corner of 52nd Street. The contrast with everything around it is violent. That is the point. The New York papers write about it at length. They describe it as the finest private residence in America. They note that the Vanderbilts are the family who built it. Alva read every word. That story belongs to the previous investigation in this series. This documentary begins where winning got complicated. Okay, I need to stop here, because this is where it gets truly bizarre. I've been obsessing over the gold ballroom at Marble House for weeks, and I honestly had to stop and reread this part multiple times before I could process what Alva actually built. We're talking about a room covered, floor to ceiling, every carved panel, every surface, in 22-karat gold leaf, 500,000 sheets of it, applied by craftsmen from the Parisian firm Jules Allard et Fils to carved wood panels depicting scenes from classical mythology. The ceiling has a fresco by the Venetian artist Giovanni Antonio Pellegrini, and on the walls, staring down at everyone who enters, are portraits of Louis XIV, the Sun King, the most absolute monarch in the history of European civilization, the man who said, "L'état c'est moi." 14 portraits painted in the style of Hyacinthe Rigaud, the same court painter who produced the iconic 1701 image in which Louis poses in ermine robes and high-heeled shoes and makes absolute power look like a theatrical production. She puts Louis XIV in her ballroom. In America, in the most aggressively democratic republic on earth, in a country that fought a revolutionary war specifically to reject the principle of hereditary monarchy, Alva Vanderbilt builds herself a throne room and fills it with the image of absolute royal authority. She is not making an ironic comment. She is making a claim. Newport in 1892 registers the claim with the specific recognition that someone has just built something that cannot be answered. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. Alva is a woman who grew up in a boarding house in New York after the Civil War, a woman whose mother smiled at lodgers to pay the rent, and she builds a room covered in portraits of the most powerful man in the history of France, a room that says, in the most expensive visual language available in 1892 America, "I am this now." Whatever you thought I was, whatever the boarding house said about what I could become, look at this room and tell me again. I don't think it worked, actually. I think the gold ballroom is among the most spectacular failed arguments in American architectural history. It argues for a kind of absolute power that the Gilded Age couldn't sustain, and that Alva herself would spend her second half dismantling. But it is magnificent, and the failure is magnificent too. The architect Richard Morris Hunt, first American trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, designer of the Statue of Liberty's pedestal and the Fifth Avenue facade of the Metropolitan Museum, is at the absolute height of his reputation when Alva commissions him for the second time. He has already built her the 665th Avenue mansion. He knows how she works. In private correspondence from the construction period, he describes working with Alva as requiring considerable stamina. This is architect's language for she is difficult, demanding, and usually right. The exterior facing is white Westchester marble, severe and luminous in Rhode Island light, a 4-column Corinthian portico. The main doors, ornamental steel and glass, weigh a 1.5 tons each. 2 footmen are required to open them. This is not an accident of engineering. It is a statement about the weight of admission, about who gets to cross a threshold and what it costs them. $7 million of the $11 million budget, 64% of the total, is spent on marble alone, before furniture, before chandeliers. 7 million on stone. The number becomes meaningful only when you imagine the ships that carried it, the men who unloaded it at Newport docks, the stonemasons who cut and set each piece. At the project's peak, more than 200 men work on site in a single day. Among them, Giacomo Ferrante, an Italian stonemason recorded in a Newport construction ledger from August 1990, paid $3.50 per day for precision limestone cutting, roughly $120 in today's money. He is responsible for the carved acanthus scroll work on the Corinthian capitals, each one requiring 3 days of sustained chisel work. His scroll work is in every photograph of Marble House. His name is in no public account of it. There were, by the end of the construction, perhaps 300 men who had spent more than a year of their working lives building Marble House. Some of them, the skilled Italian stonemasons, the ornamental plasterers, the metal workers, had come from Europe specifically for the project. Others were local men from Newport and Providence, carpenters and glaziers and plumbers who woke up each morning and went to Bellevue Avenue and did work that would outlast them by more than 100 centuries. They are in the building. They are not in the history of it. Inside, beyond the gold ballroom, the stair hall in 2 stories of yellow sienna marble under wrought iron and gilt bronze railings modeled on Versailles, the dining room in pink Numidian marble from Algeria, the Gothic room with its groined ceiling and fireplace copied from the Jacques Coeur house in France. Every room a thesis, every thesis expensive. The servants who keep it alive work in the invisible architecture behind the public rooms. Patrick Connors, whose name appears in a single household ledger from 1895, is paid $18 per month as an underfootman, roughly $640 in today's money. He earns in 1 month with the marble in a single afternoon of construction cost. He polishes it every day. He does not own any of it. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont is eventually admitted as the first woman member of the American Institute of Architects, not as an honorary gesture, because the buildings are extraordinary and the buildings are partly hers. But let me go back to the gold ballroom one more time because I have been genuinely obsessed with it, and I think there is something there that standard accounts miss completely. When Hunt designs the ballroom, he and Jules Allard at Phil's are drawing on a specific visual vocabulary. The 22-karat gold leaf panels, the carved mythological scenes, the ceiling fresco, all of this is Baroque French court decoration, the visual language of Versailles specifically. And I keep asking myself, why does Alva choose this vocabulary over, say, the English country house style that most of Newport uses? She chooses Versailles because Versailles is about a specific relationship between the person at the center and everyone else. Louis XIV did not invite you to Versailles to impress you with his taste. He invited you to remind you of your relative smallness. The whole architectural program, the scale, the gold, the paintings, the way every sightline terminates in something that reminds you of the king's absolute authority, exists to make every visitor feel the precise weight of the distance between themselves and the man at the top. Alva knows this. She has been thinking about French architecture since she was 12 years old in a boarding school outside Paris. She builds that room, and she puts it in Newport, Rhode Island, where the old families of New York spend their summers in comparative wooden modesty. You can imagine what it felt like to be invited to the Marble House ball for the first time, to walk through those 1.5-ton doors, to climb the yellow sienna marble staircase, to enter the gold ballroom, to look up at Louis XIV looking down at you, to understand, without anyone saying a word, exactly what has been communicated. This is social warfare conducted at the architectural level. The gold ballroom does not pretend to be anything that what it is. It does not perform modesty. It says, here is the scale of my ambition. Here is what I think of myself. Look at it. Newport noticed. The Breakers rises 3 years later. Rosecliff follows that. Ochrecourt follows after that. Marble House starts an arms race and wins it before the second shot is fired. And the most remarkable thing is that by the time the war ends, Alva is already moving on to a different war entirely. If you watch this channel's investigation into Mrs. Astor, you already know what happened in 1883. In brief, for anyone coming in fresh, Alva threw the most expensive party in New York history and used it to force the old families to acknowledge the Vanderbilts. The full details are in the previous investigation, linked in the description. The social war is won. Move on. But here's the thing nobody talks about. What does winning actually feel like when the winning is the only thing you have been organized around for 15 years? And yet, the answer from everything Alva writes and says after 1883 is not much. She wins and immediately needs another war. She wins the social war and immediately builds the Metropolitan Opera House, not a social gesture, another assault. The Academy of Music on 14th Street controlled New York's operatic life through boxes held by the Schermerhorns and Livingstons and Van Rensselaers. When New Money tried to buy boxes, they were told none were available. There were never boxes available. That was the point. So Alva joins with the Belmonts and the Morgans and other excluded families, and they finance a building bigger and better than the Academy, which opens in 1883 and drives the Academy out of business within 2 years. She doesn't ask for entry. She builds a door and then, characteristically, charges people to walk through it. The pattern is always the same. It was never about acceptance. It was about construction. What I find most interesting, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of time obsessing over the gap between what Alva says about these years and what she doesn't say, is that she never describes feeling satisfied. She describes satisfaction at specific tactical victories. What she never describes is contentment, the sense that what has been achieved is enough. I think this tells us something important about what the social war was actually for. If it had genuinely been about social acceptance, about wanting to be in the room, to be received, then winning should have produced something. But it doesn't. She wins the 400 and immediately builds the Metropolitan Opera. She wins the opera fight and builds Marble House. She wins Marble House and the whole Newport arms race and starts looking at her husband and finding him insufficient. Basically, I think Alva Vanderbilt was always fighting the boarding house years. And here's the thing about fighting a feeling. You cannot win. You can build over it. You can bury it under marble and limestone and gold leaf and the social recognition of every important family in New York. But the feeling does not go away. It is still there underneath. And the building, all the building, is really just archaeology of the original wound. I think Alva Vanderbilt was always fighting the boarding house years. She was fighting the specific humiliation of smiling at people who had more. She built mansions to ensure that feeling could never happen again. And then she kept building because the feeling wasn't gone. It was just buried under marble. And marble doesn't bury anything permanently. Ward McAllister, the man who built the social machinery alongside Mrs. Astor, reveals the mechanics of the system he created. The revelation destroys him socially. He dies in 1995 at his club, dining alone, unmourned by the list he created. The wall collapses along with its architect. Willie K's infidelities become impossible to ignore. He is conducting an open affair with, among others, the Duchess of Manchester. The damage to Alva's dignity accumulates past the point where a divorce would hurt less than the silence. She makes the calculation. She files. In March 1995, Alva files for divorce on grounds of adultery. The settlement, over $10 million, Marble House, custody of all 3 children. The headline reads, Willie K. Vanderbilt loses. He is, according to people close to him, perhaps relieved. She is 42 years old, socially established beyond any reasonable doubt, about to do the worst thing she has ever done. Not to Willie K., to Consuelo. This is the chapter I keep returning to. This is the chapter I find genuinely hard to write about in a measured tone, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Let me tell you why. Because Consuelo Vanderbilt's story is not a story about the past. It is a story about what happens when the person with the most power in a room decides to use it. And the specific texture of what Alva does to Consuelo, the house arrest, the threats, the manufactured heart attacks, the guard at the door, is not the texture of cruelty exactly. It is the texture of certainty. Alva is not unsure about what she is doing. She is completely, terrifyingly sure. She has decided. The rest is execution. This is the woman who will spend the next 38 years of her life fighting for women's right to make exactly the kind of choice she denied her daughter. It is a story about what happens when the person who is supposed to protect you decides that their agenda is more important than your life. That story is not historical. It is happening right now, somewhere, to someone. And Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, the woman who will spend the second half of her life fighting to dismantle the structures that enable exactly this kind of power over women, is the person doing it to her own daughter, in the house she built as a monument to her own freedom. I think about this a lot. Charles Richard John Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, needs money. His ancestral estate at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, commissioned by Queen Anne in 1904 as a national gift to the first Duke for winning the Battle of Blenheim, is failing quietly. The roof leaks in 3 wings, the farms are inadequate, the collections are magnificent and unsaleable because selling them would announce the depth of the crisis. What the Duke needs is a dollar princess, a wealthy American girl, money for title, both sides knowing the transaction. Consuelo Vanderbilt is 18 years old in 1995. She is in love with Winthrop Rutherford, 29, Knickerbocker family, old money, good name, exactly the kind of match Caroline Astor would have considered impeccable. And I honestly had to stop when I first read this because the specific irony is almost too much. Consuelo's true love is everything her mother spent 15 years fighting to access. Old money, real bloodline, the room Alva had to build an opera house to enter. And Alva rejects it. She wants the Duke. Alva has decided Consuelo will marry the Duke. There are no negotiations. There is no conversation in which Consuelo's preference is weighed as if it has equal value. Alva keeps Consuelo under house arrest inside Marble House through the summer of 1895, in the house built as a monument to her own power, now functioning as a cage for her daughter. She threatens to shoot Rutherford. She claims in the middle of multiple confrontations that the stress of Consuelo's resistance is giving her a fatal heart attack, and that if Alva dies, Consuelo will carry that guilt forever. On the night before the wedding, Alva places a guard at Consuelo's bedroom door to prevent escape. The wedding takes place on November 6, 1895, at St. Thomas's Episcopal Church in Manhattan, the same church where Alva will eventually lie in state. 300 police officers manage the crowds. Inside, Consuelo weeps behind her veil throughout the entire ceremony. Her guests assume she has overcome. She is weeping because she is being forced to marry a man she does not love in a building where no one is coming to help her. The financial settlement, documented in court records, 50,000 shares of Beech Creek Railroad stock, $2.5 million, approximately $91 million today, plus an annual income of $100,000 for each spouse for life. The Duke uses the money immediately. The Blenheim roof is repaired, the heating systems modernized. Blenheim, which was quietly failing, is stabilized by Vanderbilt Railroad stock converted into English stone and English wages. He was precise about what the marriage was for. He was right about whether it would achieve it. On the honeymoon, the Duke tells Consuelo he married her only to save Blenheim. She already knew. The knowing didn't make it easier. I've read Consuelo's memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, published in 1952 when she was in her 70s. What strikes me most about it is the quality of her restraint. She does not savage her mother. She does not perform forgiveness. She simply describes what happened with a precision that is more devastating than either rage or absolution. She describes the heat in her locked room at Marble House, the sound of the ocean she cannot reach, the days that pass without any choice about how they will pass. She describes her mother's face during the confrontations, not angry exactly, but absolutely certain, the expression of someone who has decided that her vision of the future is more real than the present suffering of the person in front of her. I find that face difficult to look at directly, even through her daughter's prose. Blenheim Palace is cold in ways Consuelo doesn't expect, cold in its formality. Cold in the distance between herself and everything she recognizes. Winston Churchill, the Duke's cousin, ambitious and brilliant, visits frequently and is one of the more nourishing presences in her Blenheim years. She establishes a school for children of the estate's workers and engages seriously with the tenants. They respond to her with a warmth the aristocracy she married into doesn't produce. She is admired by people who know her work rather than her position. The couple separate in 1906 after 11 years. The divorce comes in 1921. In 1926, Alva testifies before the Vatican Rota in support of Consuelo's annulment. Under oath, "I forced my daughter to marry the Duke. I have always had absolute power over my daughter." The court grants the annulment. Consuelo marries Jacques Balsan, the French aviator who had loved her since she was 17, who waited 26 years for her to be free. Their marriage lasts 35 years. Winston Churchill paints landscapes in their gardens near the chateau near Fontainebleau. They escape the German occupation of France in 1940 through Spain and Portugal. They are happy in ways Consuelo's first marriage made impossible and her second makes real. What do we do with Alva's voluntary confession? She didn't have to testify, she chose to. Whatever she took from Consuelo in 1995, she didn't compound it by lying in 1926 when the truth could restore some of what was lost. This doesn't excuse what she did, nothing excuses it, but it is part of who she was. What I keep coming back to is Consuelo's restraint. She had every reason to be savage in the memoir. Alva locked her in a room, threatened murder, faked a heart attack, and delivered her to a man who told her on the honeymoon that the transaction was complete. Consuelo had every right to end her mother in print. She chose not to. Near the end of the memoir she records that she and Alva reached some kind of accommodation in Alva's final years, not a complete reconciliation, not a resolution of the damage, something more careful than either. A mutual acknowledgement that they were both, in their different ways, the product of the same original injury, a world that had decided what women were for and was enforcing that decision with all available instruments. Alva used those instruments on her daughter. Then she spent the rest of her life trying to dismantle them. I'm still not sure what to do with that. I've been sitting with it for months. Here is what I find most remarkable about Consuelo's memoir rereading it now. She writes near the end about a visit Alva makes to Blenheim sometime in the early years of the marriage. Alva is uncomfortable in England in a way she is almost never uncomfortable anywhere. The English aristocracy does not recognize her standing, does not know who she is outside of being Consuelo's American mother, and treats her accordingly. She is not the most important person in the room. The tables at Blenheim are arranged by a hierarchy far older than the 400, and Alva is nowhere near the head of them. British aristocracy does not care about American money, not really, not in the way it cares about 300 years of the same family occupying the same county. Consuelo writes about this without apparent satisfaction. She is not scoring points, she is observing something genuinely interesting about her mother, that the discovery of limits does something to Alva, that finding a wall she cannot build through, even temporarily, even at Blenheim where she is the mother of the Duchess, produces something that looks in Consuelo's description almost like grief. What Alva does with that grief is spend the next 30 years making sure no woman has to feel it for the same reason. Blenheim Palace is cold in ways Consuelo doesn't expect. Cold in its formality. Cold in the distance between herself and everything she recognizes. Winston Churchill, the Duke's cousin, ambitious and brilliant, visits frequently and is one of the more nourishing presences in her Blenheim years. She establishes a school for children of the estate's workers and engages seriously with the tenants. They respond to her with a warmth the aristocracy she married into doesn't produce. She is admired by people who know her work rather than her position. The couple separate in 1906 after 11 years. The divorce comes in 1921. In 1926, Alva testifies before the Vatican Rota in support of Consuelo's annulment. Under oath, "I forced my daughter to marry the Duke. I have always had absolute power over my daughter. The court grants the annulment. Consuelo marries Jacques Balsan, the French aviator who had loved her since she was 17, who waited 26 years for her to be free. Their marriage lasts 35 years. Winston Churchill paints landscapes and their gardens at the Chateau near Fontainebleau. They escaped the German occupation of France in 1940 through Spain and Portugal. They are happy in ways Consuelo's first marriage made impossible and her second makes real. What do we do with Alva's voluntary confession? She didn't have to testify, she chose to. Whatever she took from Consuelo in 1895, she didn't compound it by lying in 1926 when the truth could restore some of what was lost. This doesn't excuse what she did, nothing excuses it, but it is part of who she was. What I keep coming back to is Consuelo's restraint. She had every reason to be savage in the memoir. Alva locked her in a room, threatened murder, faked a heart attack, and delivered her to a man who told her on the honeymoon that the transaction was complete. Consuelo had every right to end her mother in print. She chose not to. Near the end of the memoir, she records that she and Alva reached some kind of accommodation in Alva's final years. Not a complete reconciliation, not a resolution of the damage, something more careful than either. A mutual acknowledgement that they were both, in their different ways, the product of the same original injury. A world that had decided what women were for and was enforcing that decision with all available instruments. Alva used those instruments on her daughter. Then she spent the rest of her life trying to dismantle them. I'm still not sure what to do with that. I've been sitting with it for months. Here is what I find most remarkable about Consuelo's memoir, rereading it now. She writes near the end about a visit Alva makes to Blenheim sometime in the early years of the marriage. Alva is uncomfortable in England in a way she is almost never uncomfortable anywhere. The English aristocracy does not recognize her standing, does not know who she is outside of being Consuelo's American mother, and treats her accordingly. She is not the most important person in the room. The tables at Blenheim are arranged by a hierarchy far older than the 400, and Alva is nowhere near the head of them. Consuelo writes about this without apparent satisfaction. She is not scoring points, she is observing something genuinely interesting about her mother, that the discovery of limits does something to Alva, that finding a wall she cannot build through, even temporarily, even at Blenheim, where she is the mother of the Duchess, produces something that looks, in Consuelo's description, almost like grief. What Alva does with that grief is spend the next 30 years making sure no woman has to feel it for the same reason. Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont is 5 years younger than Alva, considerably more interested in enjoying his life than in running his family's banking empire, and possessed of what the social columns of his era describe, with characteristic understatement, as an inordinate love for his horses. This is where it gets truly bizarre, bear with me. His Newport mansion, Belcourt, designed by Richard Morris Hunt between 1891 and 1894, because in Newport in the 1890s you use Richard Morris Hunt, is built with the horses in mind from the foundation, not in a separate stable on the grounds, on the ground floor of the main house, in stalls paneled with teak, the wood joints fitted as precisely as any room upstairs. The horses' blankets are pure Irish linen embroidered with the Belmont family coat of arms. Their bedding is changed 3 times daily by English grooms who are paid wages that the linen costs more than weekly to produce. And then, and this is the part I genuinely had to reread 3 times, 2 of Oliver's favorite horses, after their deaths, are stuffed by a taxidermist, mounted on mannequins dressed in medieval suits of armor, and displayed in the center of the 500-guest ballroom. Standing knights, in full plate, dead horses inside, presiding over dinner parties. Oliver had also, before Alva, deserted his first wife on their honeymoon to travel in Spain with a French dancer, a detail that doesn't appear in respectable biographies, which Alva certainly knew before she married him. She married him anyway, and honestly, Good for her. She was 53 years old and had decided that love, actual love, not the strategic alliances she had been constructing since her 20s, was worth some risk. She always says she married Oliver for love. Reading the accounts of their years together, I believe her. He is nothing like the social machinery she has built herself around. He is free in a way Alva has never quite been free. He doesn't need to prove anything. Maybe that is what she loves. Outside their bedrooms at night sleeps Azar, 6 feet 6 inches tall, Egyptian, in an ornate military uniform topped by a red fez with a knife between his teeth. He remains with Alva until her death in 1933, long after Oliver is gone, long after everything she built has changed its purpose. He is one of the few people in this entire story whose loyalty to Alva is entirely unconditional. The historical record does not ask what he thinks of any of it. She moves into Belcourt after the wedding and immediately redesigns it. Of course she does. The horses come off the main floor. The stalls become a banquet hall. She does to Belcourt what she does to everything, takes what exists and remakes it to serve her current purpose. The marriage is, by all accounts, genuinely happy. The years with Oliver are the years she is simply alive, without the grinding machinery of social warfare. They entertain, they travel. Oliver does not humiliate Alva, and Alva does not grind Oliver down. On June 10, 1908, Oliver dies. He is 50 years old. An appendectomy at Brookholt, their Long Island estate in East Meadow, a substantial property they use for quieter entertaining that Newport's obligations don't permit, goes wrong. Peritonitis, septic poisoning. Within days, it is over. The New York Times reports he submitted to the operation knowing the risk, that he spent his final days worrying not about himself but about his wife. He leaves Alva everything. Several mansions, approximately $10 million. After his death at Brookholt, Alva refuses to sleep in the room where he died. She commissions a new master bedroom. The room is completed. On the day of its completion, a mason recorded in local records only as T. Murphy falls from a ladder inside the new room and dies. Alva tells a friend, "It really does seem as though fate has decided I am never to sleep peacefully at night." She is 55, twice widowed, more wealthy than she has ever been. The social world she spent her first 40 years conquering is already dissolving. She has won every battle she set out to win. Alva is constitutionally incapable of maintenance. The social war is over. She needs a new wall. She finds one. It is much larger than the one she was climbing before, and it is, in the end, the wall that matters. In 1909, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont founds the Political Equality League. The organization supports politicians who favor women's suffrage, funds campaigns, builds political infrastructure for a movement that has been asking politely for decades and receiving polite refusals. She funds it almost entirely from her own resources. The same fortune that paid for 500,000 sheets of 22-karat gold leaf in the portraits of the Sun King now pays for pamphlets and the salaries of women who spend their days knocking on doors in neighborhoods Alva Vanderbilt has never walked through. She also opens Marble House to the public. I want to linger on this for a second because I think it gets glossed over and it shouldn't. Think about what the house represents in 1909. It is the most visible monument in Newport to the idea that some people simply exist at a different level from everyone else. The architecture says it, the materials say it, the ton-and-a-half doors say it, and Alva, who built it, who chose every detail, who argued with Hunt for 4 years to make sure it said exactly what she wanted it to say, opens it to the public for 25 cents and gives the money away. Something has changed. Fundamentally, irreversibly changed. Privacy is not merely a preference for the Gilded Age wealthy, it is something close to a theological principle. The house is a marker of status precisely because it is inaccessible. To open it, charge admission, and direct the proceeds to a political cause is to turn a monument to social ambition into a tool for dismantling the very structures that made that ambition necessary. The Newport Daily News for August 12, 1909 records the admission price, 25 cents. She charges 25 cents for access to a house that cost $11 million to build, and she gives every cent to the cause. She meets Alice Paul. Now, Paul and Alva are, in almost every surface respect, completely different. Paul is a Quaker from Burlington, New Jersey, ascetic, focused, trained in the British suffragette movement under Emmeline Pankhurst, willing to go to jail, willing to be force-fed, willing to endure whatever the cause requires. Alva is extravagant, 60 years old, and accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room she enters. And yet they worked together effectively for 20 years. The explanation, when you actually look at it, is simple. They both knew exactly what the other had. Paul needed Alva's money and social credibility. Alva needed Paul's strategic clarity and willingness to absorb punishment. Neither of them wasted time pretending. In 1912, Alva organizes the Women's Vote Parade in New York City. She funds it, plans it, and then marches in it, dressed impeccably because she is Alva Vanderbilt and she is always impeccably dressed, but in the ranks nonetheless, walking down Fifth Avenue with women who have never been to Newport. On March 3, 1913, the eve of Woodrow Wilson's first inauguration, she helps fund and mobilize the women's suffrage procession in Washington, D.C., the first large-scale march on Washington in American history. Thousands of women in suffrage white walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. The crowd turns hostile, shoving, violence on the edges. The police do very little. The coverage turns sympathetic. The image of women walking peacefully through a crowd being harassed is difficult to frame as anything other than an argument for the cause. In the summer of 1914, she hosts the Conference of Great Women at Marble House, the first national meeting of the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage, which will become the National Woman Party. Florence Kelley attends. Alva's own daughter, Consuelo, the Duchess of Marlborough, attends a meeting about women's freedom in the same house where she was locked in a room 19 years earlier. I don't know if they discuss this. The historical record, for once, stays quiet. Also in 1914, Alva builds the Chinese tea house on the cliffside behind Marble House. Hunt and Hunt design it, Richard and Joseph Howland Hunt, sons of the original Marble House architect. 3 generations of the Hunt family now connected to Alva's built world. The tea house is modeled on 12th century Song dynasty temples, yellow curved roof, red columns, green walls, perched directly above the Atlantic. Tea is served during the suffrage rallies. The porcelain cups carry the inscription, "Votes for Women." Here is the thing I cannot stop thinking about. The tea house is built in 1914. Consuelo is locked in Marble House in 1995. The building where Alva exercised absolute power over her daughter's most intimate choice becomes 19 years later the headquarters of the movement fighting for women's freedom from exactly that kind of power. Same address, same woman. Did she choose Marble House because she knew what the irony meant? I cannot answer this with certainty. What I can say is that she knew what the house had been. She let it become something else. She funds a national press bureau which generates coverage of suffrage activities in newspapers across the country. She funds legal challenges to discriminatory laws in court. She pays for the training of a new generation of women political organizers who will carry the work forward after her death. She is not a passive patron. She brings to the suffrage movement the same strategic attention she brought to the social campaigns of her Newport years, the same insistence on planning, on execution, on measurable outcomes. She demands accountability. She wants to know where the money goes. In 1916, she and Alice Paul co-found the National Woman Party. In January 1917, NWP members begin the Silent Sentinels, the first sustained picketing of the White House in American history. They stand in silence with banners. Wilson ignores them. The police arrest them. Among those arrested and sent to the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia is Lucy Burns, Irish-American from Brooklyn, arrested twice previously in England under Pankhurst, who leads the hunger strike at Occoquan that forces the force feeding that finally turns the public tide. Burns is force-fed repeatedly, rearrested, force-fed again. Alva pays her bail every time, visits her, funds the legal challenges. She endorses Pond's cold cream in newspaper advertisements and silverware to raise money for the cause. The movement needs the income. She does this without embarrassment. I want to stay with the silent sentinels for a moment, because this is the part of Alva's story that reveals the most about how far she has traveled from Newport. The women who picket the White House in 1917 are not by and large wealthy. Lucy Burns, who leads the hunger strike at the Occoquan workhouse, is the daughter of Irish immigrants from Brooklyn. The women arrested alongside her, their names are in the Washington police arrest logs from January through November 1917, include a dressmaker, a librarian, a telephone operator, a schoolteacher, and a nurse. These are not women who could have afforded the 25-cent admission fee to Marble House in 1909. Alva pays their bail, all of it, every time. She visits them at Occoquan when they are force-fed. She sits with them. She funds the legal challenges. She does this not because they are her social equals. They are not by the standards she was raised to apply, but because the cause is the cause, and what matters is what happens at the end. I find this genuinely moving in a way I did not expect to. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, whose whole life until 1909 was organized around social hierarchy, is sitting in a jail visiting room in Virginia, holding the hand of a Brooklyn telephone operator who got arrested for standing in front of the White House. The distance between those two women is the distance between the gold ballroom and everything outside it. Alva crossed it, voluntarily, and I think that matters more than almost anything else in this story. On August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment is ratified. The deciding vote is cast by Harry Byrne, 24 years old, youngest member of the Tennessee state legislature, after receiving a note from his mother asking him to be a good boy and vote for suffrage. After 72 years of organized effort, after the marches and the arrests and the force feedings, a note from a mother to her son. Alva watches it ratified. She receives congratulations. She does not stop working. The suffrage movement does not end with the 19th Amendment. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont knows this better than almost anyone in 1920. The vote is a tool, not an outcome. The deeper structures of exclusion, equal standing before the law, equal access to political power, equal protection in the workplace and the courts, remain intact. She shifts her focus to the Equal Rights Amendment. In 1921, she becomes president of the National Woman's Party, a position she holds until her death. She purchases the NWP's headquarters building in Washington, D.C., a handsome federal-style house on Capitol Hill that will eventually be designated the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, named for both Alva and Alice Paul. She funds its renovation. She turns the same obsessive organizational attention to the ERA campaign that she brought to the social war in the 1880s, identifying the leverage points, funding the strategic work, refusing to be satisfied with partial progress. After the 19th Amendment, she turns her attention to international women's rights, lobbying at the Hague Conference for Equal Nationality Rights, arguing that what was won in America in 1920 was a beginning and not an ending. This international dimension of her later work is almost entirely absent from popular accounts of her life, and I find this genuinely frustrating. The social war story is more dramatic, the Marble House story is more visual, but the 15-year campaign for the ERA and international women's rights, the years from 1920 to 1933, is arguably the part of her life that matters most for the longest period of time. She is, in these years, less glamorous than she was in the Newport years, and considerably more effective, which is almost always how it goes with people who eventually figure out what they are actually for. She also writes a suffragist operetta with Elsa Maxwell, who will later become one of the most famous party planners in history, called Melinda and Her Sisters, which is performed at benefits. It is not a major artistic achievement. It raises money. She endorses Pond's cold cream and Simmons mattresses and advertisements. For those keeping track, the woman who spent $65,000 on champagne for a single party in 1883 is endorsing mattresses in 1917 to pay for pamphlets. Once Alva decides a thing matters, nothing about the method embarrasses her, not even the mattresses. She spends increasing time in France. She has always been drawn back there, to the country where she learned to read architecture, where she first understood that stone can carry meaning the way language can. She finds it restful in a way America never quite is, perhaps because in France she is simply a woman in a cafe, rather than the woman who forced the Astors to acknowledge the Vanderbilts, and forced her daughter to marry a duke, and forced American democracy to acknowledge women. At Beacon Towers, her medieval castle on Long Island Sound at Sands Point, built after Oliver's death, she fills the walls with murals depicting the life of Joan of Arc. A statue of Joan of Arc by the sculptor Prosper de Pina, cast in 1902, acquired by Alva in the early 1920s, its bronze showing the saint in full armor with visor raised, looking toward an outcome she cannot yet see, stands as the building's centerpiece. The walls around it tell the story of a woman who fought male institutions, condemned by them, burned by them, and vindicated centuries later by the same institutions that burned her. Alva identified with Joan of Arc. I find I'm not entirely sure what to make of this identification. It is both grandiose and, in certain lights, genuinely earned. Joan was a woman who insisted on having and using power in a system designed to prevent exactly that. So was Alva. Joan was vindicated posthumously. Alva was at least present for part of her own. The distance between these two fates is not nothing. After her death, Consuelo donates the Joan of Arc statue to the National Woman's Party. The daughter who was locked in the room puts the mother's Joan of Arc in the suffragette headquarters. There is something in this act, the daughter completing the mother's statement after the mother is gone, that I think will take me years to fully understand. Is it forgiveness? I do not think so. Consuelo never uses the word, and she was too precise a writer to use it casually. Maybe it is simply the most honest thing available. Alva built something, Consuelo places it where it belongs, the work continues past the worker. The statue stands in the building of the movement that outlasted both of them. She adopts Susan Anthony's motto, "Failure is impossible." Anthony never lived to vote. The amendment she spent her life fighting for passed 14 years after her death. Alva takes this as the applicable lesson. The work continues past the worker. She dies in Paris on January 26, 1933. She is 79 years old. She has left instructions in her will that a woman preacher should deliver the funeral oration at St. Thomas's Episcopal Church in New York City, the same church where Consuelo wept behind her veil on November 6, 1995. The church declines. A woman will not deliver the funeral sermon. A male priest conducts the service. Even at her own funeral, the institution she spent her life fighting refused to yield completely. Outside the church, in the January street, the women she worked with for 20 years carry a banner. They carry it because it is true. The banner reads, "Failure is impossible." She is buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx in the Hunt Mausoleum, the replica of the chapel of Saint-Hubert at the Château d'Amboise. Hunt designed the house where she ruled and the tomb where she rests. He is present at the beginning and end of everything she built. Oliver is already there, buried since 1908, waiting 25 years. There is something almost quiet about this. The woman who made the most noise of her era, coming to rest, finally, beside the man she always said she married for love. Newport, Rhode Island, today. Stand on Bellevue Avenue and look at Marble House. The white marble facade catches the light exactly as Hunt intended, severely, magnificently, as though it has no interest in your opinion of it. The 4 Corinthian columns. the ton-and-a-half doors that still require effort to open. Inside, the gold ballroom exists in its entirety. 500,000 sheets of 22-karat gold leaf still cover the carved panels. The portraits of Louis XIV still watch from the walls. The yellow sienna staircase still rises under its gilt bronze railings. Everything that cost $11 million to build in 1892 has survived into the present. The Preservation Society of Newport County acquired it in 1963. National Historic Landmark since 2006. The house, built as one woman's private statement, now belongs to anyone who buys a ticket and walks through those ton-and-a-half doors. Behind the house, the Chinese tea house sits on the cliffside where Alva built it in 1914. On certain days, when the light comes at the right angle and the sea is that particular blue that Rhode Island saves for October, it is difficult to believe that everything which happened here has already happened. It feels unfinished. In one specific way, it is. There is a photograph of Alva taken in the late 1920s. She is in her mid-70s, seated in a formal room somewhere in France, looking directly at the camera with an expression I find impossible to read simply. Not pride, not satisfaction, something more watchful. The expression of someone who knows exactly how much has been done and how much remains, and has decided to be honest about both without being defeated by either. I've looked at this photograph a lot. I'm not sure what I'm looking for in it, something that confirms the story I've told in this video probably, and the photograph refuses to confirm anything. It just looks back. The Marble House is a National Historic Landmark. The Chinese Tea House is a National Historic Site. The Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument in Washington bears her name alongside Alice Paul's in a building she purchased and paid to renovate for the movement she helped create. These physical facts will outlast this video. They will outlast everyone watching it. The trail is still there. It is still being walked. What do we do with Alva Vanderbilt Belmont? I have been sitting with this question for the entire length of this investigation, and I do not have a clean answer. I do not think there is one. She is one of those people, and they exist, history is full of them, who contain genuinely incompatible things simultaneously, not as a paradox to be resolved, as a permanent condition of who they are. She forced her daughter into a cage and spent the rest of her life fighting to make cages illegal. She built a monument to her own social ambition and then turned it into a monument to someone else's freedom. She was the villain and the hero of the same story, sometimes simultaneously, and the story is true in both versions. There is a version where she caused harm and then tried to do good, and the second thing is not sufficient to undo the first. That version is accurate. Consuelo's 11 years at Blenheim, the tears at the wedding, the loneliness of a life arranged by someone else's ambition, these are real. The annulment testimony, I have always had absolute power over my daughter, does not give those years back. There is also a version where she is one of the most consequential women in American political history, where her wealth, her will, her absolute refusal to accept that institutions are fixed, produced measurable and lasting change in American democracy. That version is also accurate. She contained both. She was always both. She blazed trails through ground she had torn up herself. She was the glitter and the gold, her daughter's phrase, her daughter's title for the story they shared, and she knew it, and she lived with it, and she turned it into work. Stand in the gold ballroom. Look up at Louis XIV looking down at you. Walk out the back. Stand in the tea house. The Atlantic is in front of you. The Marble House is behind you. The same woman built both. And I still don't know, I genuinely don't know, whether she understood what she was building it for until near the very end, or whether she always knew and simply needed a long time to build her way towards saying it. Both things might be true. All of it might be true simultaneously, which is exactly why Alva Vanderbilt Belmont is so difficult to summarize and so impossible to forget. Failure is impossible. She meant it. She is still, from 1933, insisting on it. Now, before you go, the next investigation on this channel is a story that starts very differently from this one. No locked rooms, no suffrage marches, no daughter weeping behind a veil. It starts with a door opening. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, July 23, 1892. A young man walks into an office on the 5th floor of a building on Chronicle Square. He is carrying a concealed pistol and a knife. The man sitting behind the desk is Henry Clay Frick, the most feared industrialist in America, the man who had just sent Pinkerton agents to break a strike that killed 11 people, the man his own partner Andrew Carnegie called his greatest mistake. The young man shoots Frick twice in the neck, then he stabs him 3 times. Then a bystander wrestles him to the ground. Frick refuses anesthesia while the surgeon digs the bullets out. Then he goes back to work. The building that man constructed with that fortune, on 5th Avenue in New York City, built with the money from the steel mills and the broken union and the blood of the Homestead strike, is now one of the most visited art museums in America. 3 million people walk through it every year. Almost none of them know what it cost to build it. Not in dollars, in lives. That is the next investigation. If you want it when it arrives, subscribe now. It will be worth your time. If you enjoyed this investigation into Alva Vanderbilt Belmont and the story of Marble House, please like this video and tell us in the comments whose story you want us to investigate after Frick. Every mansion has its shadows. Every shadow has a person inside it. Thank you for watching.